The breeze at Angel's Rest Station never ceased its motion. It murmured softly through the dry grass, stirred dust from the gravel trail, and sent scattered papers swirling like forgotten prayers. The sky appeared dull and flat, stretched thin over a land that no longer held much promise. There was only one bench, one rail, one water tower, leaning as if it no longer cared. Sitting on that bench was a young girl barefoot, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, with a pair of women's boots tied together hanging over one shoulder. She did not cry anymore. She had already shed her tears inside the cramped train washroom, beside a still hand growing colder with every mile. Tears were meant for gentler places, for people with rooms and warm fires, not for the vast cracked plains where even the sun seemed weary of shining. No one had asked her name. The conductor helped her off the train with a stiff gesture and said, "Wait here, someone will come." Then he boarded once more. She did not wonder where this someone would emerge from, or how they would know she was the one meant to wait. Her dress was now too short, frayed above the knees. One pocket had a hole, revealing the ear of a fabric rabbit with no face. She turned it over in her hands again and again like a worry stone. An hour went by, perhaps two. A cart trundled past without stopping. Men came and went, glancing at her as people glance at stray dogs, half sympathy, half fear of being bitten. She watched them without blinking. Dust settled in the creases of her dress and the corners of her eyes. She blinked once, then gazed down the tracks as if willing the past to rewind and bring her mother back to life. A dog sniffed near her feet before wandering away. Still, she remained seated. When the sheriff passed by, he narrowed his eyes at her like a riddle no one had asked him to unravel. "Where are your folks, girl?" he asked softly. "My mother passed away today," she said quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, you cannot stay here," he replied. She only looked at him. He shuffled his boots, cleared his throat, and mumbled something about the preacher's wife possibly knowing what to do. "I will check after supper to see if anyone has come for you," he added. He never asked her name. The afternoon faded into evening. The breeze cooled but did not cease. A horse approached steadily, hooves gentle on the dry dirt. Its rider swung down not far from her. A tall man in a worn coat and a wide-brimmed hat, tilted low, carried a small box of nails under one arm. She observed him like a stray dog watches people, ready to run, but silently hoping. The man did not look her way immediately. He tied his horse, inspected his saddle strap, and set the box into the nearby wagon. Then, finally, his eyes met hers on the bench. She stared at him directly. That look caused him to hesitate. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a wrapped sandwich, still mostly untouched. Without speaking, he crossed to her and offered it. She stayed still. "It is turkey," he said. His voice was rough and low, like gravel underfoot, yet it held no bitterness. She accepted it with both hands. Without waiting for gratitude, he turned back to his wagon. She unwrapped the parcel slowly and carefully, as if rushing would make it disappear. Her first bite was too large. She chewed steadily, her eyes fixed on the man. He prepared another small bundle, tightened the rope, and climbed onto the wagon seat. His hands were large and worn, but moved gently. Once more he glanced toward her, unsure why. Then she spoke quietly. "May I spend a day with you?" There was no trembling in her tone, no begging, only a simple question dropped like a stone in still water. He remained silent for a long moment, staring first at the sky, then back at her. At last, he gave a single nod. She rose without hesitation and walked toward him, the cloth-wrapped rabbit swinging from one hand, her boots thudding softly along behind. He did not reach out to help her. She climbed the wheel herself and settled beside him. "What is your name?" he asked, as the wagon creaked onward. "Emily May." He nodded once more. "James Holt." They spoke no more for many miles. The land stretched wide and arid around them. Sparse cottonwood trees leaned away from the sun. The wind tugged strands of her hair, making them dance, and she allowed it. He kept his gaze on the road ahead, but frequently glanced sideways to confirm she was still there. When they arrived at his ranch, the gate scraped against the ground as he opened it. The place was modest, not more than a barn, a chicken coop, and a simple wooden house. The sun-faded wood appeared as if it had been constructed with more optimism than actual materials. A clothesline swayed gently in the breeze, though it held nothing. The porch steps creaked beneath their weight. This time he lent her a hand going down. The dog approached quickly, a worn-out mutt with a limp and an ear bent oddly. When he knelt to stroke its head, the dog wagged once before settling beside her as if she had always been part of the place. Inside, the house was tidy yet modest. A solitary chair sat near the fireplace, a kettle hung from a hook, and a table held 2 chairs, though one was covered by a pile of old books. She showed no surprise at the simplicity. He poured her a tin cup filled with milk and set it before her. She stared at it quietly for some time. He took a seat opposite her and remained silent. "Where is your wife?" she inquired. He blinked once and answered, "It did not work out." She nodded, as if that explanation was enough. She took a slow sip of the milk. Later that evening, James Holt spread a spare blanket on the couch, but hesitated. "There is a bed upstairs if you prefer," he offered. "I will stay with the dog," she replied. He agreed silently. A small lantern rested beside her feet as she climbed the stairs and closed the door, leaving it slightly ajar. She curled up on the rug by the dog, her boots folded under her head like a pillow. He did not sleep, but sat quietly in the upstairs room, gazing out the window. The vast emptiness of the land made his thoughts resonate deeply. A coyote's howl echoed distantly. Closing his eyes, he recalled the sound of a woman weeping in a bed that never cradled children. He remembered how silent the house had grown since then, and how simple it had become. For a moment, it seemed like small sounds no longer mattered. Footsteps, breathing, the soft clinking of a cup. "Now you pay attention." Downstairs, a child was quietly breathing. The next morning, he found Emily May in the barn feeding the chickens. "Do you know how to do that?" he asked. She simply shrugged. "I watched. You do not have to work. You are just visiting. I like feeding animals," he said. Later that day, James Holt rode into town to buy sugar and flour. Emily sat beside him again, silent, watching the breeze. At the general store, the locals noticed that James asked the shopkeeper's wife, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Patch, just for the day, he explained. She seemed frail. "She has been traveling," he added. He paid and left quickly. The woman watched him silently with her mouth slightly open. Back on the wagon, Emily said nothing, but her hand rested gently on his sleeve. That evening, James prepared cornbread. Emily burned her fingers trying to help, and he quietly dressed the wounds. She did not complain. They ate together at the table. A second chair had been cleared for her. After dinner, Emily drew a simple picture of his horse with a small piece of charcoal and pinned it to the wall using an old tack. "You draw?" he asked. "Sometimes," she replied. He studied the picture. It was not perfect, but held a certain life. The lines were delicate, showing a care you cannot learn from books. Later, she curled up on the rug once more. This time, James placed a second blanket over her. She said nothing, but moved closer to the dog, as if waiting for that small kindness. He stayed in the chair until the fire burned down. In the quiet, he said softly, "I will take you back tomorrow. They will understand what needs to be done." She remained silent, yet he could have sworn the dog glanced up as if it disagreed. The following morning, he was packing the wagon when the sheriff arrived on horseback. "Good morning, Holt," Wexler greeted, fastening his horse to the fence. "Good morning. Is that the girl from the station?" James nodded. "You keeping her?" James did not respond. The sheriff continued. "The preacher's wife is checking with the Burkes. They might take her in. Many people are already asking questions. I did not think kindness required approval. James replied. Kindness doesn't. But this town operates on its own special fuel, and people do not appreciate it catching fire. Strange, the sheriff said, tipping his hat and riding away. James stared at the horizon for a long time after. Inside, Emily was packing her rabbit and boots into the burlap sack. He leaned against the doorframe. Are you ready? She looked up. Am I leaving? He stayed silent. Her lower lip trembled for the first time. Then she said, I can be very quiet if it helps. He took a step forward, but stopped himself. I am not sending you to a bad place, just somewhere with other children, perhaps younger ones. She looked down. I am not small enough, she whispered. His chest ached in a way he had not felt for years. Outside, the wagon groaned under the weight of anticipation. Inside, a young girl stood motionless, boots held in hand, rabbit hanging limp against her skirt. And somewhere in his mind, a woman's voice softly asked, What if we are not broken, James? What if we are not? If we are only meant to carry what others have abandoned? He reached out to grab his coat and turned away, unable to trust the expression on his face. Then a faint voice spoke behind him. Could I stay one more night? The wind howled through the gaps of the porch, and he closed his eyes before nodding. What? He asked, sounding like a man who had already lost too much to refuse someone's simple plea to remain. The morning arrived fragile and golden, with the wind tracing low across the grass like searching fingers looking for something missing. At the Holt Ranch, nothing stirred at first. Not the porch swing, not the shutters, not even the chickens. Only silence, vast as the open plains. A silence so thick it seemed as though the house had not been inhabited for years. James Holt stirred his coffee slowly and watched the girl through the window. She was already outside, sitting on a feed bucket, knees drawn tight to her chest, gazing at the chicken coop, as if hoping it might offer guidance. Her boots, still tied together, swung from the porch railing. She had not put them on since she arrived, uncertain if they meant moving on or staying. The dog rested its chin on her foot, but she remained still. James took another deliberate sip, eyes never leaving her. He was waiting for something, perhaps for her to speak first, or for the memory of his wife to direct his next move. Instead, the wind replied, lifting the corner of a saddle blanket and causing the barn door to flap once. It was the kind of restless wind that reminded a man of every promise he had ever failed to keep. She stepped outside, still clutching her mug, without looking up. Are you hungry? He asked. A moment lingered in the quiet of early morning before she softly answered. I could be. He gave a slight nod and headed back towards the kitchen. By the time the skillet was sizzling, she had settled on the step, gently swinging her legs. Through the open door, she observed every move he made. Not desperate, but alert, as if expecting things might vanish. He placed 2 eggs and a thick slice of sourdough on a tin plate in front of her. She grasped it with both hands, as if it might slip away. After a while, he said, You do not have to clean the plate. She paused, a drop of yolk on her chin. Not if it is already clean, she replied. He almost smiled. When she finished, she stacked her plate on his. Want to help with something? He asked, hesitating. Have you ever watered a horse? She blinked solemnly and admitted no, but felt capable of learning. She trailed him to the trough, barefoot and quiet on the dirt. He watched her try to lift the pail, which was too heavy. Without asking for aid, she dragged it half full, spilling water on herself, and then reached for another. He observed silently before turning to the saddle post. He had never seen someone so small claim so much space just by trying. Later, he taught her how to brush the mare. She enjoys behind the ears, he said. I like behind the ears too, Emily said flatly. He looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Inside the house, he handed her a rag and pointed to the dusty windows. She does not need to do that, a voice called from the door. Mrs. Patch stood still, holding a closed parasol. Her face wrinkled, as if it had been dried in the sun for too long. It was morning on James Holt's side. She entered without a word. I came to check if you were truly committed to keeping her. She is not some abandoned dog, Emily May. You avoided the question. Then, without saying anything, you poured yourself a second cup and left it on the table. Nearby, a figure lingered by the far wall, clutching a cloth rabbit tightly against her chest as if it were a protective talisman. Leona examined her from head to toe. Your girl is quite fragile. Emily nodded once. Any family ties? No, ma'am. Leona clicked her tongue and turned back to James Holt. The preacher's wife still believes the Burkes might take her in. They have room. Burkes only want attractive orphans, James said calmly. The type they can show off on Sundays. She would be cared for. I am the one looking after her now. Leona squinted suspiciously. James, you are a bachelor, and people tend to remember things. Do you really believe it is wise after what happened before? Something in his expression shifted quietly, like a man closing a door that was never meant to be seen through. I have more space in my home than half the people preaching from the pews. Leona sniffed dismissively. She will break your heart as well. Then she left. The door clicked sharply as if it slammed. Emily did not inquire what she meant, but James noticed her clutching the rabbit even more tightly than before. That afternoon, he saddled the mare and brought her to the pen. Walk her slowly around it. She looked up at him as though he had given her something sacred. For 10 minutes, she walked in uneven circles. At every few steps, she looked toward him to check if he was paying attention. He was. That evening, she brought firewood to the fireplace without anyone asking. He prepared the stew. She peeled the carrots and handed them over silently. After dinner, she settled again on the rug, but this time placed her boots next to his by the door. Before he put out the lamp, he noticed, and she spoke into the darkness. Have you ever tried? Tried what? He replied. Having children. He paused before answering. Yes. Did they survive? No. Was it the mother's fault? He glanced out the window. They said it was mine. There was a long silence. Then softly, as if sharing a secret, she said, My mother said I was loud and stubborn, but worth it. He swallowed hard. You are quiet now, she added. Yes, I am. Still worth it? He remained silent. The fire in the hearth crackled slowly and tiredly. He kept it burning longer than usual. The next morning she was already outside again, feeding the chickens. One pecked her hand, making her cry out, but then laugh too. He stood on the porch with his coffee, watching her while the dog nudged his leg. Yeah, he said, I see her too. He hitched the wagon before midday. We need to restock, he said. Can I come? She hesitated, then nodded. She put on her boots without a word. They were too large, flapping at every step, but she wore them as if they were armor. The journey to town was quiet, yet not empty. She asked him about the different types of clouds. He explained which ones brought storms and which just drifted by. Storms always come, she remarked. Sometimes they leave something behind. At the general store, people took notice once again. Emily May stood outside alongside the preacher's wife. James Holt happened to pass by, his arms loaded with fresh fabrics. She looks lovely in blue, Elsie Burke said with a false sweetness. She looks lovely now, James replied as he continued walking. Inside, Emily ran her fingers over a line of marbles in a jar. He bought me one. I picked a red marble with a swirl that looked like fire inside. Have you ever played? He asked. She shook her head. She had never had anyone to play with or lose to. Outside, a whisper floated through the air. That is the cursed rancher's stray. James stiffened at the words. Emily simply kept walking. Reaching the wagon, she said, They don't truly know you. He looked at her. They think they do, she added quickly, but they really don't. Without saying a word, he helped her climb up. Back at the ranch, she placed her marble on the windowsill where the sunlight hit it perfectly. It belongs to me, she declared, but I want to see it glow. That night, she fell asleep once again, cuddled with the dog, a toy rabbit in her arms. James lingered downstairs longer than usual. The fire crackled, the clock ticked steadily, and his boots still sat beside his chair. In the silence he murmured, "You are worth it too." He did not realize she had overheard until she softly replied, barely awake. "I know," he answered. The following morning the sheriff came back, remaining on his horse. "She has 2 days," he announced, showing a sign from the Burkes. "You don't need to make this more difficult." James said nothing. "She isn't yours, James." He glanced at the house and then down at the small boot prints in the dirt, but refused to look back at the sheriff. He simply stated she never asked to be there. Inside the house, a young girl crouched silently behind the curtain. She had listened to every single word, and her marbles slipped off the windowsill, rolling across the floor like a truth nobody could silence. The gossip spread quicker than rain after a long dry season. By late morning, the general store was thick with chatter. Women folded flour into brown paper bags while their hands moved without thinking, their mouths weaving stories fresher than the bread they came for. Words such as improper, unnatural, and wrong buzzed around like flies on a hot summer day, just loud enough for those meant to hear. James Holt's name lingered heavily in the air, like the stubborn smoke of a wood fire that refused to rise. They said he had softened, that solitude had twisted his judgment, that taking in a little girl with no family, no papers, and no promise of adoption was an open door to trouble. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he might do next. They said men who had lost things became unpredictable, especially men like James, skilled with his hands, unlucky in life. When he rode into town to pick up a horseshoe order, the whispers parted like curtains pulled aside by a breeze. Eyes flicked toward Emily May sitting beside him, small hands folded in her lap, a red marble in one hand and a cloth rabbit in the other. He said nothing, but she felt it all, every glance, every murmur, every place where they were unwelcome. After they left, Mrs. Patch put down her yardstick and spoke quietly to no one in particular. Specifically, "You spoil your reputation for one girl and you will never recover it." He asked about this quietly on the way home, his voice barely above a whisper. "What does it mean to spoil your reputation?" James did not reply immediately. Instead, he adjusted the reins and stared ahead, as if the explanation might be hidden in the dust swirling before them. "It means people stop speaking about you with kindness." She stayed silent for a moment then. "They already don't speak about mine with kindness." The wagon rattled over a bump. Neither moved. At the ranch, James tried to ignore it, handed her a metal bucket, and indicated the blackberry bushes growing along the fence. "Pick only the ripe ones, not the green ones. You will notice the difference in taste." She gathered berries until her fingers were stained deep purple. He observed her silently from the barn, pretending to fit new horseshoes, but his gaze never left her. Not when the breeze lifted her dress, not when the dog nestled beside her like a quiet shadow. That evening inside, she placed the berries on the table with quiet satisfaction. He tousled her hair. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. After dinner, she asked to draw again. He handed over the last sheet of butcher paper he had, and she worked carefully. Her strokes were slow and deliberate, just like everything she did. He did not glance until she offered it to him. It was a drawing of his porch, his boots and hers side by side. He studied it for a long moment, then said, "I will find a nail for that." She smiled without showing her teeth. That happened rarely. Later, after Emily May had gone to bed, James Holt remained awake, repairing a drawer that had been stuck since the cold season. Not because it truly needed repair, but because the quiet inside the house suddenly felt overwhelmingly loud. When he finally lay down to rest, he discovered a note on his pillow. It contained just a single sentence written in bold block letters. "I like your quiet." He folded the paper carefully and found himself unable to sleep. The next morning, James set off to town by himself. Emily stayed behind with the dog, offering scraps for it to eat while she flipped through an old mail order catalogue that confused her. It listed items she had never encountered. She whispered the words softly, velvet, as she traced over them, then continued, petticoat comb with pearls. In town, James went directly to the preacher's home. He requested 10 minutes, but was granted only 5. She does not belong with the Burkes, he stated. The preacher responded with gentleness. James, no one doubts you are a decent man, yet the past is long remembered. You believe you are protecting her, but you are making targets of yourselves both. She needs a safe place to settle. James insisted, I am not a threat. No one is saying that, the preacher answered, but it does not matter what is true. People believe what they want, and their choice right now is the wrong one. James gave a single nod, the kind men offered before facing a fire they could not extinguish. Without further permission, he left. That evening, he drove a nail into the wall and hung the drawing. When Emily saw it, her lips parted slightly before closing again. She stepped closer, touched the frame's edge, and then rested her forehead against his arm for a brief moment. "You're not going to let them take me, are you?" she asked, but he stayed silent. Still, she remained close to him throughout the night. "At bedtime," she inquired, "did anyone ever choose you?" He paused before answering, "No, not even when you were small. No one wanted the quiet boy," he explained. "I want him," she declared, then curled up with her rabbit and drifted off to sleep. By morning, he understood what was necessary. He cleared out the back room, which had been a storage space filled with old gear, a broken rocking chair, and crates of books from a school his wife once dreamed of starting. He opened the window, letting light stream in as it hadn't done in years. He swept the floor, fixed the latch, repaired the torn curtain, and hung a drawing over the head of the small bed he had assembled from available materials. It was modest, but it belonged to her. After lunch, she saw the room and stood silently. "This is for me." "It's a room," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I never had one." "Well, it's small," he added. She didn't move, then stepped forward to touch the quilt. "You folded it really well," she said. He nodded. When she wrapped her arms around his waist, he paused only momentarily before bending down and returning the hug. Gentle but enough. That very same day in town, someone posted a notice on the church door announcing that the town council would review guardianship concerns about an orphan minor in several days. Mrs. Patch passed by with a satisfied hum, while the preacher removed his hat and rubbed his eyes. The sheriff spat on the ground and murmured, "Should have kept quiet, Holt." When the letter was in James Holt's hands, Emily May was running her marble along the porch railing. You read it, folded it, didn't say a thing, but she felt the storm brewing in his silence. That evening, she watched him whet his knife at the kitchen table, not because it needed sharpening, but because his hands needed to be busy. She whispered, "If I'm not good enough, they'll take me away, won't they?" He avoided her gaze. "You don't need to say it," she said softly. "I understand how this goes. People leave." He looked up suddenly. "You didn't do anything wrong. They always say that first." He rose slowly, as if trudging through thick mud, then knelt before her. "You won't go anywhere unless you want to." She blinked hard and then nodded. "What hurts like that?" Later, he found her asleep on the floor again, right outside her new room, not inside it, as if afraid it might vanish if she claimed it fully. He carried her inside and tucked the quilt under her chin. Then he stepped back and stood still. He didn't cry, but something inside broke quietly, like a frozen fence post finally yielding to the thaw of spring. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He hitched the wagon and told her they were going somewhere. Where to? Somewhere that would show him who she really is. She didn't ask again and climbed beside him. They rode into town slowly, dust swirling behind like a snake's tail. He stopped before the schoolhouse. The classes had not started yet, only the teacher, Miss Carrilli, was sweeping the steps. He asked, "May we come inside?" She seemed puzzled, but gave a small nod. Once inside, Emily sat down at a desk for the very first time. She picked up a pencil as if it might bite her. He requested a sheet of paper from Miss Carrille, who handed it over while narrowing her eyes. He passed it to Emily with the instruction to write her name. She appeared frightened. "You can do it," he encouraged. She wrote, "Emile," then stopped abruptly. "May?" he gently prompted. She completed it. He gave a nod and then turned to Miss Carrille, saying, "She is not a stray. She is a person." Miss Carrille swallowed hard and softly replied, "I can see that." Outside, someone had caught sight of them, the sheriff, Mrs. Patch, and 2 neighbours. By evening, the gossip had shifted, yet something else had changed as well. At home, Emily pinned her paper next to her drawing. Then she looked up at him and asked, "Do I have a last name yet?" He paused before answering, "Not yet." She nodded as if she understood, but her eyes betrayed a hopeful look. That night, he sat alone outside, his hands clenched tightly. He never intended for things to escalate this far, nor for his heart to feel so deeply again, nor for the town to turn so sharply against them. Yet that morning, the girl had slipped a marble into his boot, and somehow that signified everything. The next day, he found her making cornbread with too much salt and not enough flour. "It is terrible," she said, defeated. "You already tasted it." Then she added, "Try again." She looked up at him. "Together?" He nodded, and she smiled. Outside, a wagon was already approaching the road, carrying the Burkes who had come early and ready. Emily May spotted them through the window and softly murmured to herself, "I could be yours. I don't have to belong to hers." James Holt overheard her and rose so quickly that the chair tipped backward. The Burkes stepped down from their wagon, dressed as if going to church. Elsie wore a sky-blue bonnet that seemed untouched by the wind for months, and Grady was clad in a coat far too stiff for manual work. Their boots crunched sharply on the gravel, each step deliberate and practiced. Behind them, the sheriff waited mounted on his horse, arms folded, jaw clenched. James stood in the doorway, steady but tense, gripping the frame. Her fingers whitened by her grip, while the red marble rested in her palm like an unfulfilled wish. Grady grinned like a man eager to win a wager. "Morning, Holt. We thought we'd save the preacher the trouble." James did not move aside. Elsie peeked past his shoulder. "There she is, such a fragile thing. You must be weary, dear girl. Come now, there's no need to fear." Emily remained silent, with her chin lowered. "She's not going with you," James said calmly. The sheriff cleared his throat. "You don't hold guardianship. That council notice is valid, and the Burke's approval came in yesterday." Elsie nodded quickly. "We've already prepared her a proper room, curtains and everything." "She has a room," James replied. "And a name. She is not for display." Elsie's smile thinned. "We're offering her stability." "This is anything but that," James answered. Emily May spoke about pride. James Holt added, "You are a good man, James, but even a good man knows when to let go." James looked down at Emily. She still clutched the marble, but her gaze remained fixed on the ground, not on the crowd, not on him, as if she already understood how it would end, as if she had experienced it before. He stepped closer, not away from her, but toward her, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to leave with him?" he asked. She shook her head once. "Say it out loud," he encouraged softly. Her voice wavered. "I want to stay." The quiet that followed felt tense, sharp, filled with unspoken judgment. Elsie adjusted her gloves and said, "She does not understand what is best for her." "She does," James said, "and so do I." The sheriff shifted uneasily in his saddle. "If this goes to a vote, James, it will get complicated, maybe even ugly. I have faced ugly before." James replied, "This is not that time." Elsie tried again, saying she could be part of a real family. "She is," James interrupted. "She just made a choice." James looked up at him, and then really looked. Something unspoken passed between them. It was not a promise yet, but a shared understanding. The Burkes left without further protest, though Elsie's last glance told them she would return with paperwork and the kind of people who spoke the language of law, not love. Later that afternoon, James walked slowly up the hill behind the barn, where the prairie touched the sky and the earth seemed to breathe softly. The wind moved gently there, as if afraid to disturb what had come before. A small wooden cross stood crooked in the earth. "My wife's here," he said. "Her name was Mabel." Emily's hand found his. She longed for children, always had. Tried 3 times, but nothing lasted. She sat beside the grave, tiny boots tucked beneath her skirt. "Maybe they were waiting for me." He almost laughed, but caught himself. His voice caught in his throat. "She used to sit right here watching the storms roll over the hills." He said it helped her remember that life keeps going no matter how much pain it brings. They sat quietly for a moment. Had he placed her marble stone at the base of the cross? She said so she knows he isn't taking her place. "You're not." James said, "You are creating a new one." That night, someone left a sack on the porch filled with neatly folded dresses, small ones gently worn. No note, just quiet kindness appearing unexpectedly. Emily tried each dress carefully. She picked a faded yellow one with a patch along the hem. "It looks like mourning," she said. The next day, she braided her hair with a piece of blue ribbon found in a drawer. James had never seen it before. She met him at the table, boots laced, her smile soft but confident. "Can we build something?" she asked. "Like what?" he replied. "A shelf for my drawings." He nodded. After finishing chores in town, the gossip softened. Some whispered scandal, others stubbornness. But a few, those who had also lost something, began to understand. The preacher's wife sent a book of bedtime prayers. The general store owner gave Emily a tin of peppermint candy. Even the sheriff, as he passed by on the road, lifted his hat in a silent greeting. At dinner, Emily put down her spoon and gazed across the table. "If you had a middle name, what would it be?" She pondered for some time before answering. "Hope." "Why that?" "Because you never asked for it, yet you carried it with you all along." She smiled and carefully inscribed the word in the margin of her sketch using a dull pencil. Emily May Hope. No one corrected her. That night, as the wind gathered strength and the shutters rattled like ancient bones, she did not settle on the floor. Instead, she found rest in her bed beneath the quilt, with her marble resting on the windowsill. When thunder roared and lightning tore through the darkness, she did not shed tears. But James Holt lingered in the hallway just in case. From beneath the quilt, she softly said, "You may come in if you want." He took a seat at the foot of the bed. "Are you ever afraid of storms?" she inquired. "I used to be," he whispered, "until I realized that they pass." She reached out, clasped his hand, and held on until sleep gently claimed her. He stayed longer than necessary. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the house felt no longer empty. By morning, a letter was affixed to the fence, a final hearing date, 4 days away, one last opportunity. She found it before he did and said nothing. Quietly, she folded it and placed the letter beside her marble. The day of the hearing came, dressed in grey. The sky carried no hues, only a flat shroud of anticipation. Even the wind fell silent, as if the very earth held its breath. James Holt stood beside the window, his boots securely laced, coat neatly brushed, and jaw firmly set. Behind him, the kettle emitted a steady hiss. Emily May sat quietly at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup she had not yet touched. That morning her ribbon was tied unevenly, but he did not bother to straighten it. Their journey into town was marked by silence. The wagon's wheels creaked louder than usual, each rotation of the axle sounding like a question without a clear answer. Emily's hand gripped the pocket of her dress tightly, where a marble rested safely alongside a folded letter. The town square gathered, not in joy nor in condemnation, but somewhere between those feelings. Faces peeked out from behind curtains. A few children whispered, while most adults remained silent. Inside the old chapel, the council awaited. 3 elders sat behind the pulpit. surrounded by stacks of papers and full ink pots. The Burkes occupied seats near the front, sitting straight-backed with forced smiles. Elsie wore lace at her collar, while Grady's coat was impeccably pressed. James and Emily walked down the aisle side by side, matching each step exactly. He did not place a hand on her shoulder, nor did she reach for his, yet the space between them held an invisible charge, bound by every quiet moment shared since their first meeting at the station. The preacher rose and declared, "We are here to decide what is best for the child known as Emily May. All involved parties may speak." Grady spoke first, emphasizing the importance of stability, discipline, and reputation, repeating the word appropriate 6 times. Elsie added that she had already finished sewing a quilt. Then the whispers began from behind. The town's seamstress spoke, the grocer's wife as well. Miss Carille, the school teacher, joined in. One after another they stood up, sharing their thoughts, not with exaggeration, but with calm resolve. Words like safe, seen, and happy filled the room as if glowing lanterns cutting through the mist. Then the preacher turned toward James. He stood up. "She is not just the child I took into my care. She is a girl who arrived in this world carrying nothing but sorrow in her eyes, and yet still offered kindness to my dog, my land, my peace." He paused, allowing the quiet to carry his next statement. "She did not ask to remain. She simply wanted to spend a day. But in that single day, she became something this place never gave me, a true sense of belonging." His gaze rested on Emily, who returned it with her head held high. "I do not care what the paper says. She is family already." The preacher then looked at the girl. "Would you like to say something, Emily?" She rose silently, her boots making no sound. Slowly she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded letter, the same one from the fence, lifting it up. "I read this every night." The preacher tilted his head in curiosity. "It says I have to leave." Her voice trembled at first, but then gained strength. "But no one ever asked what I want." She turned her gaze to the Burkes family. "I know you have a lovely house, but I am not a gap to be filled. I'm not a picture to hang on your wall for decoration." Her eyes met James's once again. "He lets me speak without rushing. He makes sure the fire is warm before I wake up. He nailed my drawing to the wall, not just a smile." The preacher frowned. "Do you understand what adoption means?" She nodded firmly. "It means I get to stay." He leaned back and gazed at the council. Papers shifted, pens scratched softly, then silence settled. A slow breath was drawn before the tension broke. "Emily May Holt," the preacher announced, his eyes gentle. "You are allowed to remain." Elsie gasped sharply. Grady rose, too quickly, yet no one tried to stop them as they walked away. James knelt beside Emily. She did not smile, saying softly, "Not just yet." She rested her head against his shoulder, as if needing to prove the ground still held her weight. The townsfolk started to move away, whispering in that peculiar way people do after a truth has been spoken aloud. Outside, the wind returned, swirling dust and light together. James aided her onto the wagon seat. She leaned into him. Halfway home, she spoke, "You never cried." He grinned faintly. "Did not want to embarrass you." She looked up, asking, "Can I change my name to what?" "Emily May Holt," she whispered, repeating softly, "Just that. Only that. Simply that." Upon reaching the ranch, she jumped down eagerly without hesitation. The dog barked once before running to her. She dashed toward the porch and the awaited room, toward the shelf they had yet to build. He lingered at the gate a moment longer, watching her go.